Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful negotiation technique from former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss. And get this, his whole idea flips decades of advice completely on its head. He says that in any important conversation, emotions aren't some obstacle you have to get around. They're actually the path to getting what you want.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at a real-life FBI standoff to see exactly why the old rules just don't work. Then, we'll get into the core concept, something called tactical empathy. After that, we'll learn the key tools, how to label emotions and use something called an accusation audit. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together to work some serious magic in the real world.
So, I want you to picture this. It's 1998, Harlem. You've got FBI negotiator Chris Voss standing outside an apartment 27 floors up. Inside, 3 fugitives, armed to the teeth. You've got SWAT teams everywhere, snipers on the roofs, but there's one massive problem. They have no phone, no way to actually call the guys inside. For years, for decades, really, this was the golden rule of negotiation. The whole idea was that feelings were just messy, irrational distractions, things that got in the way of a logical deal. The advice was to just push them aside, ignore them, and focus only on the cold, hard facts. But Voss had this huge realization. That's just completely wrong. I mean, how can you separate people from the problem when their emotions, their fear, their anger, their distrust are the problem? You can't. In fact, Voss says you have to do the exact opposite. And this leads us to a pretty radical idea. Instead of trying to ignore emotions, the best negotiators actually identify them, they influence them, and they use them as the very pathway to get to a deal. They don't fight against the emotional currents. They learn how to ride them.
Okay, so this brings us to the absolute foundation of Chris Voss's entire framework. It's a concept he calls tactical empathy. And this is where we really start to see how it works in practice.
So what is tactical empathy? It's really about understanding the world from the other person's point of view. It's the skill of recognizing what they're feeling and, this is the important part, vocalizing that recognition. This isn't about being nice or soft, it's about being effective. It's a tool for gathering information and building influence. Now, it's so important to get this distinction right. This is not sympathy. You don't have to agree with the other person. You don't even have to like them. Empathy is just about demonstrating that you understand where they're coming from. Think of it less as a feeling and more as a strategic tool. When you start using tactical empathy, you begin to see all these hidden dynamics in every conversation. You can spot the emotional landmines before you step on them, and you can find these little pathways to an agreement that are totally invisible to everybody else. So, if tactical empathy is the big strategy, how do you actually do it? Well, the main tool in the toolbox is something Voss calls a label. And it's incredibly simple, super direct, and trust me, it's unbelievably powerful. Let's jump back to that Harlem standoff. For 6 straight hours, Voss and his team were just talking through the apartment door. They weren't making demands or threats. They just kept repeating labels just like this one, calmly saying out loud what they knew the fugitives' biggest fears were without any judgment. Okay, so the process itself is almost ridiculously simple. First, you just listen and watch. You're trying to spot an underlying emotion. Could be anything, fear, anger, maybe even ambition. Second, you just calmly name that emotion out loud. And third, and this is the hardest part for most of us, you just shut up. You pause and you let that label do its work. Now, how you say it is absolutely critical. You never say, I think you feel, or what your feeling is, because that just makes people defensive. Instead, you use these softer, more observational phrases. It makes the label feel less like an accusation and more like you're figuring it out together. And there's actually some cool neuroscience behind why this is so effective. When you label a negative emotion for someone, you're helping move their brain activity from the amygdala, that's the primitive fight or flight part of the brain, over to the much more rational prefrontal cortex. You are literally calming their brain down just with your words. Okay, so if labeling is like a surgical scalpel, then what we're about to cover is more like a preemptive strike. This is how you use labels to neutralize all the negative energy in a conversation before it even gets a chance to blow up in your face. This technique is called the accusation audit. And I know, it sounds terrifying, right? The idea is you list out every single bad thing the other person might be thinking or could possibly say about you, and then you say it all out loud first. What this does is it takes all the power, all the sting, right out of those potential attacks. Let's look at a perfect example. A student of Voss's named Anna had to tell a smaller partner company that their pay was getting cut. Again. The relationship was already really bad. So before the meeting, she prepared by listing out all their worst fears. And she just labeled them right at the start of the conversation. And the result was just incredible. By calling out all the negatives herself, she totally disarmed them. The partners on the other side felt understood instead of attacked, and they went from being adversaries to being collaborators, actually solving the problem with her. The relationship was repaired, and her company saved $1 million. Not bad. All right, so we've got our strategy, tactical empathy, and we have our tools like labels and silence. So now let's watch how they all come together in this perfect little symphony of negotiation to solve a really common, frustrating problem. So check this out. Another of Voss's students, a guy named Ryan, had to get on a flight that was totally sold out. He goes up to the gate agent right after she's just been screamed at by another passenger, and he doesn't start with his problem. He starts with hers. He labels the negative. Then he uses a technique called mirroring, where you just repeat the last few words someone says to get her talking. And it's only after he builds that connection that he gently asks for what he wants. And boom. Just like that, in less than 2 minutes, Ryan gets a seat, and an upgrade, by the way, on a flight that was completely full. He didn't argue, he didn't demand, he didn't complain. He just used a little bit of tactical empathy to turn a potential adversary into an ally. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, real negotiation isn't about outsmarting someone. It's about understanding them. The trick is to clear away all the negative emotions first. You do that by labeling their fears and auditing their accusations. Once you've diffused the power of all that negativity, the path to yes becomes surprisingly simple. And look, this stuff isn't just for multi-million-dollar deals or hostage situations. This is for asking for a raise, arguing with your partner, or even just trying to get better customer service. So think about it. Where is one conversation in your life, just this week, where you could use a simple label to totally change the dynamic?